Rachel stood in line at the little coffee shop on 5th Street, the same one she'd been coming to for 3 years now. She loved this place. It was small, cozy, and nobody bothered her here. Well, at least that used to be true until yesterday. She pulled her baseball cap lower over her face and adjusted her oversized hoodie. The jeans she wore had a hole in the knee, and her sneakers had seen better days. This was intentional. She needed to blend in today more than ever. Yesterday morning, she'd been Rachel Torres, the quiet regular who always ordered the same vanilla latte. By yesterday afternoon, her face was plastered across every business magazine and news website in the country. Forbes had just released their annual list of youngest self-made millionaires. And there she was, right at the top, Rachel Torres, CEO of Nexus Solutions, the tech company that had somehow gone from her tiny apartment to a billion-dollar valuation in just 5 years. Her phone had been ringing nonstop. Investors, reporters, old friends she hadn't heard from in years, distant relatives she didn't even know existed. Everyone wanted something. Everyone wanted a piece of her time, her money, her story. She'd barely slept, and this morning she'd just needed to escape to somewhere familiar. Somewhere normal. The line moved forward, and Rachel found herself face to face with Amy, the barista who knew her order by heart. The usual, Amy asked with a warm smile. "Please," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Amy rang it up, and Rachel reached into her jacket pocket for her wallet. She pulled it out and froze. This wasn't her regular wallet. In her exhausted, frantic state this morning, she'd grabbed the wrong one from her dresser. This was her old personal wallet, the one she used to carry before everything changed, the one connected to her nearly empty personal checking account that she'd forgotten to close. Her corporate cards, the ones with actual money on them, were sitting in her other wallet on her bedroom dresser. Rachel's heart started racing. She pulled out the card anyway and handed it to Amy, hoping maybe, just maybe, there was enough in that old account for a $5 coffee. Amy swiped it. The machine beeped. "Declined. Let me try again," Amy said, swiping it once more. "Declined." Rachel felt her face getting hot. The people behind her were getting restless. She could feel their impatience, hear someone shifting their weight from foot to foot. Another person sighing loudly. "I'm so sorry," Rachel stammered. "I must have grabbed the wrong card." "I can come back, it's fine." She wanted to sink into the floor. Here she was, a millionaire CEO on the cover of Forbes, and she couldn't even pay for a coffee. The irony was almost funny. Almost. "Just let me run home really quick," Rachel said, starting to back away from the counter. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. Before Amy could respond, a voice came from behind her in the line. "Hey, don't worry about it. I've got this one." Rachel turned around. The man standing behind her was probably in his early 30s, wearing a faded flannel shirt with paint stains on the sleeves. His jeans were worn, and he had sawdust in his dark hair. His hands were rough, the kind of hands that did real work, not the soft hands of people who typed on keyboards all day. He stepped forward and pulled out his wallet, a simple brown leather thing that looked like it had been with him for years. "No, really, you don't have to," Rachel protested. "I live close by, I can just go grab my other card." The man shook his head and smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "It's just coffee. We all have those days where nothing goes right. Trust me, I know the feeling." He tapped his card on the reader before Rachel could argue further. The machine beeped its approval. "1 vanilla latte," Amy called out, already moving to make the drink. Rachel stood there, not quite knowing what to say. The man had already stepped up to order his own coffee, a simple black coffee, nothing fancy. She waited off to the side, her mind spinning. This stranger had just paid for her coffee. He had no idea who she was. He hadn't recognized her from the articles, hadn't seen the Forbes cover, hadn't put together that the woman in the hoodie and baseball cap was the same person smiling in that professional headshot that was circulating online. To him, she was just another person having a bad morning. When was the last time someone had done something kind for her without wanting anything in return? When was the last time someone saw her as just another human being, not as an opportunity or a target or a connection to be made? Amy handed Rachel her latte, and she took it with shaky hands. The man collected his black coffee and turned to leave. Rachel knew she should say something, but her throat felt tight. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Really, thank you." He turned back and gave her that same tired smile. "No problem. Hope your day gets better." And then he was heading toward a table in the corner, sitting down with his coffee and pulling out a laptop that had seen better days. The screen was covered in stickers and one corner of the case was held together with tape. Rachel should have left. She should have gone home, grabbed her real wallet, come back and paid him back. That would be the normal thing to do, but she didn't leave. Instead, she found herself walking over to his table. "Mind if I sit for a second?" she asked. He looked up, surprised, but gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sure, go ahead." Rachel sat down and wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I really do want to pay you back. Can I at least get your next coffee?" The man laughed, a soft, genuine sound. "It was $5. "Don't worry about it." "Still," Rachel insisted, "I'm not usually that person who can't pay for coffee. Today has just been completely insane." "I get it," he said. "Last week I had to choose between putting gas in my truck or eating lunch. I chose gas because I had a job to get to. These things happen." Rachel looked at him more carefully. There was something honest about him, something real. He wasn't putting on an act or trying to impress anyone. He was just tired, maybe struggling, but still willing to help a stranger. "What do you do?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I'm a carpenter," he said. "Well, I'm trying to be. I do custom woodworking, furniture mostly. Been trying to get my business off the ground for about 2 years now. It's been rough, but I love the work." He opened his laptop, and Rachel could see he was working on some kind of design software, creating what looked like a beautiful dining table. "That's incredible," she said, leaning forward to look at the design. "You made that?" "Yeah, well, I'm trying to make it," he said with a slight grimace. "This is a proposal for a client who probably won't hire me. They'll probably go with one of the big furniture companies instead. But I have to try, you know?" Rachel knew that feeling better than he could imagine. She remembered the early days of Nexus Solutions, sending out proposal after proposal, getting rejected over and over again. She remembered choosing between buying groceries and paying for server space. She remembered the nights spent working until 3 a.m, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. "Don't give up," she heard herself saying. "If you're good at what you do, and you clearly are, the right opportunities will come." He looked at her with interest. "You sound like you speak from experience." Rachel hesitated. This was the moment where she should probably tell him who she was. But something stopped her. Something about this moment felt precious and fragile. Here in this coffee shop, she wasn't Rachel Torres, CEO. She was just Rachel, a woman having a conversation with a kind stranger who'd helped her out. "I work in tech," she said carefully. "Small business. It's been a journey." That wasn't technically a lie. Nexus Solutions had been a small business once, just 5 years ago. They talked for another 20 minutes. He told her about his dreams of opening his own studio someday, about the kind of furniture he wanted to create, pieces that told stories and lasted generations. Rachel found herself relaxing for the first time in days, just listening to someone talk about their passion without any agenda. When she finally left the coffee shop, she had his name saved in her phone, not his full name, just what to call him, and a promise to come back tomorrow morning to properly pay him back for the coffee. Walking home, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. In a world where everyone suddenly wanted something from her, here was someone who'd given her something without even knowing her name. She wondered what he'd think if he knew the truth. Would he look at her differently? Would he suddenly want something too? For now, she decided she'd keep her secret a little longer, just long enough to enjoy being treated like a normal person again. What harm could it do? Rachel showed up at the coffee shop the next morning at exactly the same time. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. She told herself she was just going to pay him back for the coffee and maybe chat for a few minutes. That was it. She spotted him at the same corner table, hunched over his laptop with that same look of concentration on his face. His flannel shirt was different today, green instead of blue, but it had the same worn, comfortable look. Rachel ordered 2 vanilla lattes and carried them over to his table. "Peace offering," she said, setting one down in front of him. He looked up, and his face broke into a smile of recognition. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Rachel said firmly. "Can I sit?" "Of course." She sat down across from him and they fell into conversation easily, like they'd known each other for months instead of having just met yesterday. He told her his name was Daniel, and he asked if she wanted to see what he was working on. For the next 30 minutes, Daniel showed her his designs. He talked about wood grain and joinery techniques, about the way different woods aged and how to bring out their natural beauty. His eyes lit up when he talked about his work, and Rachel found herself genuinely fascinated. She realized she was smiling. Really smiling. Not the polite professional smile she gave in board meetings, but the kind of smile that came from actually enjoying herself. "Sorry," Daniel said, suddenly laughing. "I'm probably boring you to death. My friends say I can talk about wood for hours. You're not boring me at all," Rachel said honestly. "It's actually really refreshing to hear someone talk about something they're truly passionate about." "What about you?" Daniel asked. "You said you work in tech. What's your passion?" Rachel paused. When was the last time someone had asked her that? Not about quarterly projections or market share or investor relations. Just what she was passionate about. "I used to love building things," she said slowly. "Creating solutions to problems. Making things simpler and better for people. That's why I started my company in the first place." "Used to?" Daniel picked up on the past tense immediately. Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Things got complicated. The bigger the company got, the less time I had to actually do the work I loved. Now I spend most of my time in meetings, dealing with investors, managing problems. I can't remember the last time I actually built something." Daniel nodded like he understood. "That's one of the reasons I want to stay small. I know I could probably make more money if I hired people, expanded, opened a big shop, but then I wouldn't be the one actually making the furniture anymore. I'd just be managing other people who made furniture. That's not what I want." Rachel felt a pang in her chest. That was exactly what had happened to her. She'd built Nexus Solutions because she loved coding, loved creating elegant solutions to complex problems. Now she had 100 engineers who did the actual building while she sat in conference rooms arguing about budgets. They talked until Daniel had to leave for a job site. Before he left, he asked if she'd be there tomorrow morning. "Maybe," Rachel said, trying to sound casual even though she already knew she'd be there. "I hope so," Daniel said. "It's nice to talk to someone who gets it." After he left, Rachel sat there with her empty coffee cup thinking. She pulled out her phone and looked at her calendar. Back-to-back meetings from 8 in the morning until 7 at night. A working dinner after that. An investor call at 9. She opened a text to her assistant. "Clear my mornings for the next 2 weeks. 8 to 9:30. Personal time, non-negotiable." The response came back immediately. "Done. Everything okay?" Rachel smiled. "Yes, better than it's been in a while." The next morning she was there. So was Daniel. It became their routine. Every morning at 8 they'd meet at the coffee shop. Sometimes they'd talk for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour, depending on their schedules. Daniel told her about the struggles of running a small business, how a client had backed out of a major project last minute, leaving him scrambling to cover his expenses, how he'd been outbid on another job by a company that could undercut his prices because they used cheap materials and didn't care about craftsmanship. Rachel listened and asked questions, resisting the urge to offer solutions or advice like she did in her business life. Sometimes people just needed someone to listen, but she couldn't help herself a few times. When Daniel mentioned losing a bid because he didn't have a professional-looking website, Rachel said, "What if I helped you with that?" "I mean, I know a little about web design." That was an understatement. She'd built Nexus Solutions' first website herself. "I couldn't ask you to do that," Daniel said. "You're not asking. I'm offering. Let me see your current site." Daniel pulled it up on his phone, looking embarrassed. It was bad, really bad. The kind of template website that looked like it was made in 1998. "Okay," Rachel said. "I'm helping you. This is hurting my eyes, and more importantly, it's hurting your business." She spent that evening building him a new website. It was simple but professional, with clean lines that let his beautiful furniture design shine. She used her personal laptop, not her work one, and she was careful not to include any code or design elements that could be traced back to Nexus Solutions. When she showed it to him the next morning, Daniel was speechless. "This must have taken you hours," he said, scrolling through the pages on his laptop. "It was fun," Rachel said, and it had been. She'd forgotten how much she enjoyed this kind of work, the hands-on problem-solving, the immediate satisfaction of creating something tangible. "How much do I owe you?" Daniel asked. "Nothing. Friends help each other out, right?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah, friends." As the weeks went by, Rachel found herself looking forward to their morning coffee more than anything else on her calendar. With Daniel, she didn't have to be the CEO. She didn't have to have all the answers. She could just be herself. She was careful, though. She paid for coffee with cash, never cards that might have her company name on them. She kept her stories vague, talking about the company instead of my company. She wore simple clothes and left her expensive watch at home, except for one morning when she forgot. Daniel noticed. "Nice watch," he said casually. Rachel looked down at the Rolex on her wrist and felt her stomach drop.
Oh, it was a gift.
From my parents? For graduation, another lie. It had been a gift to herself when Nexus Solutions hit its first 100 million in revenue. If Daniel doubted her story, he didn't show it. But Rachel caught him looking at her thoughtfully a few times after that. She knew she should tell him the truth. Every day that passed made it harder, but she was terrified of losing this, of losing him, of watching his face change when he realized she'd been lying to him, even if it was by omission. Rachel told herself it wasn't really lying. She just wasn't telling him everything. And besides, what difference did it make how much money she had? That wasn't what their friendship was about. But deep down, she knew it mattered. And she knew she was being selfish, keeping this secret so she could hold on to these morning conversations, these moments where she felt like herself again. Daniel started opening up more about his financial struggles. His truck needed new brakes, but he was putting it off because he couldn't afford it right now. He'd been eating instant ramen most nights to save money. He'd had to cancel his health insurance because he couldn't make the payments. Every time he shared something like this, Rachel felt worse. She could solve all his problems with the money she spent on office coffee in a single month. But how could she offer help without revealing who she was? And if she revealed who she was, would he even want her help? Or would he feel betrayed, manipulated? One morning, Daniel showed up looking exhausted and stressed. "You okay?" Rachel asked. He rubbed his face. "My landlord's selling the building. I have to find a new space for my workshop, and everything I've looked at is way out of my price range. I might have to work out of my apartment, which means I can't take on bigger projects." Rachel's mind immediately went to problem-solving mode. She owned 3 commercial buildings in the city through her investment portfolio. One of them had empty warehouse space that would be perfect for a woodworking studio, but she couldn't tell him that. "I'm sure something will work out," she said, hating how hollow the words sounded. "Yeah," Daniel said, but he didn't sound convinced. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Daniel, about how talented he was, how hard he worked, and how he was being held back simply because he didn't have the resources he needed. She pulled up his new website on her laptop and looked through his portfolio again. His work was extraordinary. Beautiful, unique pieces that deserved to be in high-end homes and galleries. Then she had an idea. It was risky, and it would mean getting creative with the truth again, but it might work. The next morning, she found Daniel at their usual table. "I might know someone who can help you," Rachel said. "With the workshop space." Daniel looked up hopefully. "Yeah? A friend of mine in real estate. They might have something affordable. Let me make a call." "Rachel, that would be amazing. Really." She called her real estate manager that afternoon. Using a burner phone she'd bought specifically for personal matters she didn't want traced back to her public persona. "I need you to lease the warehouse space on Maple Street to someone," she said. "At cost, no markup. Ms. Torres, that's significantly below market rate. I know. Consider it a charitable donation on my part. But he can't know it's coming from me. Just tell him it's a special program for small business owners." "Understood." She gave Daniel the contact information the next day, making it sound casual, like she was just passing along a number. 2 days later, he came to the coffee shop practically bouncing with excitement. "I got the space," he said. "I don't know what kind of program your friend runs, but the rent is actually affordable. Rachel, this changes everything for me." Rachel smiled, genuinely happy for him, even as guilt gnawed at her stomach. She was in so deep now, so many little lies, so many omissions. "That's wonderful," she said. "You deserve it." Daniel grabbed her hand across the table. "Thank you, seriously. I don't know what I would have done without you." His hand was warm and rough from work, and Rachel realized in that moment that somewhere along the way, her feelings for Daniel had shifted from friendship into something more, and that terrified her even more than the lies. Daniel came to the coffee shop one morning practically glowing with excitement. Rachel had barely sat down when he started talking. "You're not going to believe this," he said. His hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he needed to hold on to something or he might float away. I just got an email. I've been invited to bid on a huge project. Like huge, Rachel smiled at his enthusiasm. That's amazing. Tell me about it. It's for some big tech company's new headquarters. They're looking for custom furniture for the entire building. Conference tables, reception desks, lounges, everything. This could be 6 figures, Rachel.
6 figures!
This is the kind of project that could change everything for me. Rachel's smile froze on her face. What company? Hold on, let me check. Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled through his email. Nexus Solutions. Have you heard of them? Apparently they're a pretty big deal. Run by some young CEO who just made Forbes or something. The coffee in Rachel's stomach turned to ice. Nexus Solutions. Her company. The headquarters project she'd been planning for months. She'd personally approved the list of contractors to invite for bids, working with her team to find a diverse mix of established firms and promising newcomers. She had no idea Daniel's business had made it onto that list. Yeah, I've heard of them, Rachel managed to say, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. The presentation is next week, Daniel continued, oblivious to Rachel's distress. I have to put together a portfolio and pitch. This is going to be up against some serious competition, big companies with huge teams and proven track records. I don't know if I have a real shot, but just being in the room is huge for me. Rachel's mind was racing. She had to tell him, right now, before this went any further, but the words stuck in her throat. That's really great, Daniel, she said instead. You're going to do amazing. I hope so. I've been practicing my pitch all week. Want to hear it? Of course. She sat there and listened to him practice, offering suggestions, helping him refine his talking points, all while knowing that next week, he was going to walk into her building, go up to her conference room, and find her sitting at the head of the table. That night, Rachel paced her apartment until 2 a.m. She picked up her phone a dozen times to call Daniel, to tell him everything. But what would she say? How could she explain months of deception? She could pull his bid from consideration. That would solve the immediate problem. He'd never have to know, but that wasn't fair to him either. He'd earned this opportunity, and she couldn't take it away just to cover her own lies. Maybe she could recuse herself from the process. Let her team make the decision without her, but she was always present for major presentations. Her absence would raise questions. There was no good solution. Whatever happened, Daniel was going to find out the truth, and when he did, he was going to hate her. The week passed too quickly. Rachel barely slept. She kept up their morning coffee meetings, each one feeling more precious and more painful than the last. Daniel was nervous but excited, working late every night to perfect his presentation. I've never wanted something this badly, he told her 2 days before the presentation. This could be my big break. The thing that takes me from scraping by to actually making it. Rachel wanted to tell him so many things. That his work was good enough. That he deserved this chance. That she was sorry. That she was terrified. Instead, she just said, "You're going to be great." The morning of the presentation, Rachel arrived at Nexus Solutions at 6 a.m. She needed time to prepare herself, to put on her CEO armor. She wore her Navy power suit, the one she saved for important meetings. She had her hair styled professionally, not the casual ponytail Daniel was used to seeing. She wore her Rolex, her diamond earrings, all the pieces of her public persona. Looking in the mirror in her private bathroom, she barely recognized herself. This was Rachel Torres, CEO. Not Rachel, the woman who drank coffee and laughed at bad jokes and was falling in love with a carpenter. The presentations were scheduled for 2 p.m. 5 contractors, each getting an hour to present their vision for the headquarters furniture. Daniel was scheduled 4th. Rachel sat at the head of the conference table, her executive team flanking her on both sides. The first 3 presentations blurred together. Professional, competent, forgettable. She could barely focus, her stomach twisted in knots. Then the door opened and Daniel walked in. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him, probably borrowed. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried a large portfolio case. He looked nervous but determined. Their eyes met across the room. Rachel watched the recognition hit him in stages. First, confusion. The woman at the head of the table looked like someone he knew, but the context was all wrong. Then realization. That was Rachel. His Rachel from the coffee shop. But she was here in this building, clearly someone important. Then came the final piece. Understanding. The way his eyes widened as everything clicked into place. The news articles he'd somehow missed, the Forbes cover, the small tech business that occupied multiple floors of a downtown skyscraper. The woman he'd bought coffee for, the woman he'd shared his struggles with. The woman he'd started falling for was Rachel Torres, the millionaire CEO everyone was talking about, the person whose company he was here to pitch to. Rachel saw hurt flash across his face, then anger, then something like betrayal. It all happened in the space of 3 seconds, but she felt each one like a knife to her chest. "Mr. Chen," one of her VPs said, "please have a seat. We're looking forward to your presentation." Daniel stood frozen for another moment, then seemed to gather himself. He walked to the front of the room, set down his portfolio, and began setting up his presentation materials. His hands were shaking slightly. Rachel wanted to say something, do something, but she was trapped by circumstance in the presence of her entire executive team. She couldn't acknowledge what had just happened without revealing their relationship. And from the rigid set of Daniel's shoulders, she wasn't sure he'd want her to anyway. Daniel's presentation was incredible. Even in his shocked and hurt state, his passion for his work came through. He showed designs that were innovative yet timeless, pieces that would make the headquarters not just beautiful but meaningful. He talked about sustainable materials, about craftsmanship that would last decades, about creating spaces where people would feel inspired. Rachel knew objectively that his was the best presentation they'd seen all day. Her team was clearly impressed, leaning forward, asking engaged questions. But Daniel directed all his answers to the other people at the table. He didn't look at Rachel once. When the hour was up, Rachel's VP thanked Daniel for his time and told him they'd be in touch within the week. "Mr. Chen," Rachel heard herself saying, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Daniel paused at the door. For a second she thought he might refuse. Then he nodded stiffly. The executive team filed out, giving them curious looks. Rachel waited until the door closed behind them before speaking. "Daniel, don't," he said, his voice tight. "Please don't. I need to explain." "Explain what?" Daniel turned to face her, and the hurt in his eyes was devastating. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months? Explain how you let me pour my heart out about my financial struggles while you sat on a fortune? Explain how you paid for my workshop space and pretended it was some kind of program." Rachel's throat tightened. "You figured that out. I'm not stupid, Rachel. Or should I call you Ms. Torres now?" His laugh was bitter. "I started putting things together a few days ago. The expensive watch you tried to hide, the way you always knew exactly what advice to give about business problems, how my workshop space lease came through so quickly after I mentioned it to you. I told myself I was being paranoid, that you couldn't possibly be that person. But here we are. I wanted to tell you," Rachel said desperately, "so many times. But I didn't know how. How about the truth?" Daniel's voice rose. "How about being honest from the start? Or at any point in the last 3 months? The Forbes article came out the day before we met," Rachel said. "Suddenly my face was everywhere and everyone wanted something from me. Then you bought me coffee without knowing who I was. And for the first time in months, someone saw me as just a person, not as an opportunity or a threat or a walking checkbook. Do you have any idea how rare that is? So you lied to me to preserve some fantasy where you got to feel normal?" Daniel shook his head. "Did it ever occur to you how I'd feel when I found out? Did you think about me at all? Or was I just some project that made you feel good about yourself?" "That's not fair," Rachel said, tears stinging her eyes. "You weren't a project. You were real. The only real thing in my life." "Nothing about us was real," Daniel said, "because I didn't know who you were. I thought I was getting to know Rachel, the woman who worked at a small tech company and understood what it was like to struggle. Turns out I was actually spending time with Rachel Torres, billionaire CEO, who was probably laughing at how naive I was." "I never laughed at you," Rachel said fiercely. "Everything I felt was real. Every conversation, every moment. I fell for you, Daniel, the real you. But I didn't get to fall for the real you, did I?" Daniel picked up his portfolio case. "I fell for someone who doesn't exist. A version of you that you created to make yourself feel better. That's not true, isn't it?" Daniel walked toward the door. "Every time I told you about my problems, you could have solved them with the money in your petty cash account. But instead you just listened and offered sympathy like we were in the same boat." "We were never in the same boat, Rachel. We weren't even in the same ocean. So what, poor people and rich people can't be friends? Rachel asked. Can't have real connections? They can, Daniel said quietly. But not when one of them is lying about who they are. Not when the entire foundation of the relationship is built on deception. He opened the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope my presentation was good enough. I could really use this job. Though I guess you already knew that. Then he was gone and Rachel was alone in the conference room, finally letting the tears fall. Her VP knocked on the door a few minutes later. Ms. Torres, are you all right? Rachel wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, pulling herself back together. I'm fine. Let's bring in the last presenter. That night, Rachel sat in her penthouse apartment looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a message from her CFO about the contractor presentations. Daniel's bid had received the highest scores from the team. The recommendation was to hire him. Rachel stared at the message for a long time. She could reject the recommendation, give the job to someone else, save Daniel from having to work with her, from the awkwardness of their situation. But that would be making decisions for him again, wouldn't it? Taking away his choice because it was more comfortable for her. She typed back a reply. Recusing myself from this decision. Whatever the team recommends, I'll approve. This is your call. It was the least she could do, and maybe the most. 3 days after the presentation, Rachel's team sent Daniel the contract. They'd chosen him. He'd won the biggest job of his career, and Rachel hadn't been part of the decision at all. She knew because her assistant had forwarded her the final approval documents to sign. She'd stared at Daniel's name on the paperwork for a full 5 minutes before signing it. The coffee shop felt different now. Rachel went back once, 2 days after everything fell apart, hoping maybe she'd see him there. But his usual corner table was empty. She sat there anyway, drinking her vanilla latte alone, remembering all their conversations. The barista, Amy, came over to wipe down the next table. Haven't seen your friend lately? She said casually. The carpenter guy. You two had a falling out or something? Rachel managed a weak smile. Something like that? That's too bad. You seemed good together. After that, Rachel stopped going. It hurt too much. Instead, she threw herself into work, taking meetings from dawn until late at night, filling every minute so she wouldn't have time to think. Her assistant commented that she seemed even more driven than usual, which was saying something. But at night, alone in her apartment, Rachel couldn't escape her thoughts. She kept replaying the look on Daniel's face when he'd realized who she was. The hurt, the betrayal. She'd never forget it. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Rachel got updates about the headquarters project through her team. Daniel had started the design process. The initial concepts were impressive. Everything was moving forward professionally. She wondered if he thought about her at all, or if he'd managed to write her off as just another person who disappointed him. Then one evening, as Rachel was leaving the office at 9 p.m., her assistant stopped her. Ms. Torres, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he said it's important. Daniel Chen? Rachel's heart jumped into her throat. What? Should I tell him to make an appointment for... No, Rachel said quickly. No, I'll see him. Where is he?
Lobby. Rachel took the elevator down, her hands shaking.
She hadn't expected this. Hadn't dared to hope he'd want to talk to her again. Daniel was standing by the lobby windows looking out at the city. He was wearing his paint-stained flannel and jeans, not the borrowed suit. He looked tired. Daniel, Rachel said softly. He turned. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Can we talk? He asked. Of course. Do you want to go somewhere, or here is fine? He gestured to the seating area in the corner of the lobby. They sat in the expensive leather chairs that Rachel had barely noticed before, suddenly aware of how everything around them screamed money and power. I got the contract, Daniel said. Your team chose my bid. You earned it, Rachel said. Your presentation was the best. Everyone agreed. Did you have anything to do with the decision? No, I recused myself completely. That was all them, Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, I needed to know that. That it was merit, not pity or guilt or whatever. It was merit, Rachel said firmly. You're talented, Daniel. Incredibly talented. That has nothing to do with me. They sat in silence for a moment. Rachel didn't know what to say, didn't want to push him. Finally, Daniel spoke again. I was angry. Really angry. For about a week, I was furious every time I thought about you. I understand, Rachel said quietly. You had every right to be. Let me finish, Daniel said. I was angry. But then I started thinking about why you did it. Really thinking about it, not just reacting, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've never had money, Rachel. Never had the kind of success you have. But I know what it's like to have people want things from you. After I won a small design award last year, suddenly people were coming out of nowhere asking for favors, for free work, for connections. And that was just a tiny taste of what you must deal with. Rachel felt tears starting to form but held them back. I thought about that Forbes article coming out, Daniel continued. How suddenly everyone in the world knew who you were, knew what you were worth. I thought about you walking into that coffee shop the next day, desperate for some normalcy, and then some guy buys you a $5 coffee without recognizing you. You were kind, Rachel said. You didn't want anything from me. I didn't even know who you were. Daniel laughed, but it wasn't bitter this time. That must have been refreshing. It was more than refreshing. It was like I could breathe again. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. I get it now. Why you didn't tell me. I mean, I'm still hurt that you didn't trust me eventually, but I understand the instinct. I wanted to tell you, Rachel said, her voice breaking. Every single day. But I was terrified of losing what we had. Those mornings with you were the only time I felt like myself. Like Rachel, not Rachel Torres, CEO, I was selfish and I'm so sorry. You were scared, Daniel corrected. There's a difference, Rachel wiped at her eyes. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. That who I was outside those coffee shop conversations wasn't relevant. But I was lying to myself as much as I was lying to you. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you what hurt the most? Please. It wasn't the money thing. It wasn't even really the lying, though that stung. He ran his hand through his hair. It was that you heard all my problems, all my struggles, and you could have helped but didn't. Every time I talked about not being able to afford something or losing an opportunity, you could have solved it. But you just sat there and listened like you couldn't do anything. Rachel felt like she'd been punched. I thought about it constantly. Every time you mentioned money troubles, I wanted to help. But how could I do that without revealing everything? And more than that, I was afraid you'd feel like I was trying to buy you or our friendship. See, that's the thing, Daniel said. You made that choice for me. You decided I'd feel that way without ever giving me the chance to prove otherwise. That's what trust is, Rachel. Believing someone will understand even when it's risky. He was right. Rachel knew he was right. You did help eventually, though, Daniel added. The workshop space. I figured out that was you. That was wrong of me, too, Rachel admitted. I should have been honest about it. Maybe. But you did it because you saw someone struggling and wanted to help. The execution was flawed, but the heart of it was good. Daniel leaned back in his chair. That's what I've been struggling with these past few weeks, trying to separate your intentions from your actions. And, Rachel hardly dared to ask, I think you're a good person who made some bad choices because you were scared, Daniel said. I don't think you were trying to manipulate me or use me or whatever. I think you were just trying to have one part of your life that felt normal. I was, Rachel said. But that doesn't excuse what I did to you. No, it doesn't, Daniel agreed. But I didn't come here for an apology. I mean, the apology is nice, but that's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? Daniel looked at her with those same honest eyes she'd fallen for in the coffee shop. Because I miss you. I miss our conversations. I miss having someone who understood what it's like to care about your work so much it keeps you up at night. I miss my friend. Rachel's breath caught. I miss you too. So much. But here's the thing, Daniel continued. If we're going to try to rebuild this, it has to be based on honesty. Complete honesty.